All right. Hello, my seafood friends. I'm Amanda Buckle, Deputy Editor for the Americas at Undercurrent News and co-host of everyone's favorite industry podcast, Catch the Current. But today I'm trading those hats in to host Undercurrent's latest webinar on the current environment in recirculating aquaculture systems, or RAS. So joining me today and doing most of the heavy lifting, if I'm going to be honest, is Matt Craze, founder and lead researcher of Spheric Research. Based jointly in the UK and Chile, Matt is the author of at least a dozen seafood industry research reports published in conjunction with Undercurrent News. And if you were in Cartagena, Colombia a few weeks ago for the Global Seafood Alliance's Responsible Seafood Summit, you would have seen him speak on stage and present data on his report on the sushi landscape. And today, Matt's breaking down Undercurrent's 2025 Land-based Aquaculture Report a little bit, which we lovingly call the LBAR. And like I said, going deep into the current landscape of the RAS systems. But Matt's not alone. He brought along a friend. As Andy Warhol once said, one's company, two's a crowd, and three's a party. So we're starting an aquaculture party here. So also joining us to talk about land-based aquaculture is who some may call the godfather of modern RAS farming, Ivar Warrer Hansen. Ivar has worked on some of the first commercial RAS models in the 1970s, eel farming, if I'm correct, and was the co-founder of the aquaculture department at the Water Quality Institute in Denmark. He's the co-founder of RAS Logic, a company that leverages its expertise to advance accountability and sustainability in aquaculture system developments worldwide. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. And Matt, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, we thought we'd do a podcast on RAS systems in 2025, near the end of it, because there's just so much that has happened, both in the technologies to grow fish to a larger smolt weight in the salmon industry, and also what we call the grow-out industry, so growing fish fully on land. I think most people know that there's a backstory that there's been a very dramatic increase in production, in investment, deal flow, I should say, in the last few years. And that has resulted in a first generation of projects. And there's been some quite notable failures with projects. And right now we're in a kind of situation where there are a few projects that are getting developed and are starting to show some success, and actually quite a lot of investment. Not many people are aware of where the industry's at right now, and I thought that would be an interesting topic to take on. Also, with Ivar joining me, I'm delighted because we've spoken for a long time. I've produced the Land-based Aquaculture Report for the last 7 years or so, and Ivar's a fountain of knowledge and has been really involved in the industry right up until now, both as a consultant and working with some of the major projects in Denmark as well. Maybe Ivar, you just talk a little bit about your background, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Matt, for the kind words. Well, I started at what then was called the Danish Water Quality Institute, where we were working with many aspects of water treatment, water pollution, etc. And we then, in Denmark, had quite a significant trout farming industry, conventional trout farming. And we thought at the Institute, let's try and look at other species which could be interesting. And then we started, in fact, looking at the recirculation, and we were very lucky in that we got a big grant from the Danish Shell Oil Company. And we built the first semi-commercial eel RAS. And that became the beginning of RAS, at least in Europe, with eels. And it became quite a significant industry, and it spread around the world, even to the Far East. And then I probably became a little too interested in aquaculture, because I went to Ireland and started fish farming myself, and started with trout farming, and then salmon smolt, and then salmon farming in the sea. And I never lost my interest for recirculation, and I in fact sold off and then got back into recirculation, and where I worked a lot with a Danish company called Aqua Advance. And from there, I worked with Nordic Aqua Farms with their US project, which unfortunately in Maine, we never got the licenses. And from then on, I started RAS Logic, and that's where I am today.
And I'm on mute. And so, and Ivar as well, I think you've been in a consulting capacity. You've also been working with some of the latest generation of Danish projects, and Denmark's been really interesting in the sense that there are 2 projects there right now that are at quite large capacity levels compared with what has been historically in our database. We, some of the earlier projects were built to grow up to 500 tons a year of Atlantic salmon, many of which have not reached those levels of production. In the case of these 2 Danish facilities, Danish salmon being one, and the other being Skagen salmon, these are companies that are producing several thousand tons of capacity and seem to be having some success. And I wondered if when you look back, are these projects right now really going through, would you say are going through like a glass ceiling with performance and production?
Yeah, well, if we look at Danish salmon, they started in 2012 with a system which didn't work quite as well, and as everybody did in the very beginning there, in the beginning of the, let's say, 2010 or 12, 14, to prove that they could compete with conventional salmon farming, they were probably a little too optimistic with their figures. And in the case of Danish salmon, which was planned as a 2,000-ton unit, the maximum they have reached is 1,200 ton. But then they built a new extension recently, which is the same concept as Skagen salmon, and that extension is doing very well. And together, Danish salmon is doing very well, just like Skagen salmon. Skagen salmon are, in fact, performance-wise, they are producing a little more than what was projected, and that's very positive. That's probably the first example of that, where they can produce more than the planned production. And so those 2 companies, they have a future. But people are not quite aware of that, because we seldom hear about that. There are a lot of RAS units which actually work very well within the. I mean, I've worked mostly with salmon, but we have so many smolt units around which are doing quite well. And we even, that was the Interaqua Advance, they built for 20 years ago a Clares unit, a 2,000-ton Clares unit in the Netherlands, which is still operating today and is very successful, but you don't hear those stories always.
Yeah, that's right. That's the catfish farm, isn't it?
Yes,
African catfish.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, Amanda, I was wondering if you could bring up one of my slides. When we talk about profitability, I'm often asked, because as you know, authoring this report, the LBAR report, about the fact that there's no companies. I often hear there aren't any companies that there's actually another one, which is a bunch of dots, Amanda. It must be the last one. So we actually published this slide a long time ago, and it just looked at the profitability of salmon farming companies. And you have this remarkable performance of the top companies in the world, like Mowi, Leroy, and these companies, even with major cataclysmic events in the world like COVID or the Russian sanctions in 2015, have never recorded a quarterly loss, EBIT loss, in 10 years of production. And we actually used this slide in a presentation about 2 or 3 years ago for a bond prospectus, and it was used by Wells Fargo in this bond prospectus. What we did last week was Stolt Sea Farm had this amazing quarter, which is sole and turbot fish, and the sole is grown in a RAS system. This company hasn't recorded a single quarterly loss, this is gross profit, since the second quarter of 2021. It's had more than a dozen quarters of profitable performance, and it's achieved what we would call steady state production. And also it's invested in another company called the Kingfish Co., which is also as well showing really good signs of success. These are species that appear to do quite well in a RAS system. And actually, Ivar, I'd be keen to ask you. You brought up the example of Clares, but do you think what's your thought on the suitability of salmon in RAS systems versus other species? So there does seem to be some species that do really well in these systems.
Well, salmon, you can do it, but a salmon is a very, you can call it a moody fish. It really relies on the signals you give them. And if we, for instance, compare salmon with large trout, same family, but a trout is so forgiving. A salmon isn't necessarily forgiving, but it is still possible. But now you mentioned turbot, which I think is a very good candidate, not least that now Stolt Sea Farms in Portugal and Spain, they are getting 13 euros per kilogram. It's very good. And it would be also suitable in RAS. In fact, it was produced in RAS, it's been produced in RAS for I don't know how many years, 20 years at least. And the biology is known, and just like kingfish is also a newer exciting species for us. It's also a little tricky, the kingfish, but still it's possible. And then finally, I think there's a future for large trout in RAS because it is such a beautiful fish to farm. And I think it's a good product too.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because we see a really significant increase in interest on large trout in RAS systems. And we have, for example, this company called Himar Seafood in Norway that's commissioned a huge RAS trout facility. It seems to have got through that critical construction phase and the smolt phase with no issues at all. And now we have a company in Sweden, Big Aqua, that seems to have the finance to go ahead with 6,000 tons a year. And it does seem that, and you have to. I'm at here right now I'm in Chile. The large trout that comes out of Chilean farms, out of the sea, it's a remarkably good product, and people like it just as much as salmon. Yeah. And I really wonder if there's the future. Really, it could be partly with trouts in this space.
Well, that's true. And when you mention those projects, there's also at the moment being built a 3,000-ton trout unit in Singapore.
Yeah,
which
the Blue Aqua project. Yeah.
Yes, precisely. And that's a very exciting concept we have. And so I think trout is it's one of my favorite fish.
Yeah, you can buy it in this country. There's a couple of companies that sell Australis seafoods here and Salmonis Antarctica, which belongs to Nisui, and they sell those they have a shop in the south of Chile, and it's a remarkable product, and I've seen across the world as well. I really wonder if that could be a very significant part of the future for this space. And certainly something that I'm interested in looking further at with the report. So I'd actually, Amanda, I was just thinking, like, I'd be keen to get the other slides up is we're going to talk about
Yep.
Atlantic salmon and what's happening with that space. There's again, this is a little bit of a myth busting exercise here, that the investment dollars into, it's actually the other one. It's the one that looks like a list. That's it.
Yep.
Um,
Too far.
no worries. And in actual fact, there's an awful lot of there's a few misconceptions around this industry, and one of them is that the investments really slowed down since project failures like Atlantic Sapphire. In actual fact, if you add up what's being built right now between flow through, hybrid flow through, and full RAS technology, there's almost 100,000 tons a year of production capacity that's being built right now. And actual fact, I have a trout project on here, but if we actually mentioned as well the project that you just did, Ivar, which is in Singapore, and there's one or two others, you include trout, we have over 100,000 tons of new capacity coming online. That's not including the fact that Laxey in Iceland has just done, I think, 4,000 tons, and Hemar is another 9,000. We're at a phase right now where there is a huge new generation of projects that are coming online and are going to kind of reshape the future of this industry, either by succeeding or failing.
I'm going to jump in here and note that, long list of countries here. It's Iceland, Norway. We have just one, China. Can you talk about more about China's growth in the future? Obviously, it's gearing up, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll allow Ivar to chime in on this one as well. I mean, there's one Norwegian-backed project called Nordic Aqua Partners that's built a 4,000 ton facility near Shanghai. They had one or two issues at the very beginning with off flavor. They seem to have overcome those challenges. That company operators of a post-smolt, very big post-smolt facility in Norway, so they really know what they're doing with RAS systems, and they're building phase 2. And the interesting thing as well is that they're getting some finance inputs as well from Chinese banks and investors. And that's a super interesting thing. The one that's really taking off right now, and I've actually just been to Japan and I visited 2 of these sites. I've been to the Pure Salmon site, which is a 10,000 ton per year farm. And that was being built just as I was there. They completely built the hatchery, and this is Pure Salmon owns a company that used to be called Kruger Caldness, that it was the Veolia technology, and those guys have built more than 25 RAS hatcheries, so they really know what they're doing, at least in the hatchery stage. And then the other one is FRD, which is a trout project, and this facility was entirely built, ready for startup, and 3,500 tons, and that's a trout project. So there's some really super interesting things happening in that part of the world. South Korea as well. Ivar, what's your take on China and these Asia investments?
Yeah, I mean, things are happening in China, and it's. I mean, we still have a problem that there are some RAS concepts which may not be performing as they should, and there are others that do it, and that is what people have to get around. That you have to choose the right technology. But what's happening in China is because they are getting so much support from the Chinese government with these projects, which is good, and I'm very happy that the Nordic Aqua Partners seemingly is going very good, and it seems that they are going to make it, performance-wise, and the Pure Salmon project in Japan is also, it's a very good technology. They have some, which is calculated in, they have some extra capex because they have to do some different things, as they have not got any very little makeup water. But it's I think that's going to be a successful project.
Yeah. They have an issue with, if I'm not mistaken, with warmer intake water, which they have to cool.
Yeah,
so
no,
they're playing with this new denitrification technology that would allow you to actually recirculate a higher percentage of the water.
Yeah, but they need to do a lot of membrane treatment for their makeup water, and it's quite expensive because you still need a lot of water for purging, for instance. And so they are treating their purging water, which is a little an extra add-on. But I think they will make it. It looks good. So we have 2 units in Denmark which are doing extraordinarily well, and there is something coming on which is exciting.
Yeah. So many of these projects on the list, Ivar, are hybrid flow-throughs. Yeah. Or indeed just pure flow-throughs based on a modern concept like Gigante and Andfjord salmon. Do you think there is a space there for the full RAS concept? And how far do you think one of the things I'm really interested in is if the technology is changing, because it has the concept of RAS has not really changed in its basic building blocks for quite a long time. But I think what I seem to observe is there's lots of little smaller improvements that are just refining the process.
Yeah, I mean, we are honing in on what is possible, and that's the most important thing with regards to husbandry, for instance. But the improvement now with AI makes things a lot easier, but there will. I don't think there will be any breakthroughs in the technology, because we still have a pump we need, we still have a drum filter we need, etc., a biofilter, but we can improve so much in decision making, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and I think that you've always talked quite a lot about the biofilters and the fact that some biofilters are better than others and perform better than others.
Yeah.
Do you think that the current generation of projects has got that part of the process right?
Most of them, I would say. Yeah, most of them. But with the hybrid, I mean, the hybrid is the technology. It's of course a little simpler, but it's hybrid technological. It's sound. It'll work. It's still a matter of location and say infrastructure, which may not be that easy with the location of these hybrid systems, because they still do need. It's not. They are more expensive to operate than a cage farm. And if you are up in Lofoten, it's a long way from the market. But if you can find the right sites, which are a little more adjacent to salmon hubs, hybrid is a fantastic solution too.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things there is if other countries, right now those types of projects have been limited to Norway and Iceland, but if some other countries that have, let's say, quite good ocean conditions for most of the year, let's say, for example, in South Korea and Japan, but maybe just 1 month where the weather just doesn't really permit for net pen farming. I mean, Japan's now getting a little bit more aggressive with net pen farming with salmon, but I wonder if the hybrid route is going to be the way with these, some of these countries.
Well, I think so, because with the hybrid, if you have a location where you can take water from below what's called the thermocline, where you will find very stable temperatures all year round. I mean, that is the solution, and if you can get that, it's a very good concept.
Right.
But that needs a certain depth, water depth, to in an area.
Yeah. I think you referred to one of the main challenges of this technology a few minutes ago, but when we talked about the fact that you can't really circumvent the need for a drum filter and the biofilter, and these are the things that add up to the full RAS having a capex production cost of close to $30,000 a ton. Do you think there's really an opportunity for the industry to significantly decrease the capex requirements of these facilities, or are we just going to get another crunch with salmon supply that will make the 30,000 ton figure just a positive NPV model?
Well, I think we can make some improvements and some savings in future, RAS, in that when we have a salmon in a tank where we feed it, but the large salmon close to grow-out age feeds very little. And I'm guilty myself, but we are probably doing too much with water treatment where it's not necessary in these situations. We're used to smolt, maybe post-smolt, which we have carried on to grow-out, where we could in principle maybe reduce, now you mentioned drum filters, by 50% by not treating the water biologically the same percentage. We could then substitute the drum filters with maybe ozone skimming instead to really improve conditions. And that's the thing I'm having in my mind right now with some new projects, some new thinking.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, that would certainly move the needle a little bit.
Yeah. I would say we could save 50% of a drum filter is, I always call it's a necessary evil, okay? But we need it here.
Yeah, and quite a large part of energy costs,
it is,
and therefore OpEx as well. Yeah. And actually, I'll show the last slide, Amanda, and then we can turn that one off. But yeah, basically, what we see is, we've come up with a salmon production forecast for the first time for Atlantic salmon. In the report, you get a lot more numbers. We have an optimistic base case and pessimistic scenario, but based on the capacity that we see coming online, we think that this industry is going to be contributing about 200,000 tons of Atlantic salmon, in this case, Atlantic salmon only, to the markets by 2030. And this does include the hybrids and the flow-throughs. One of my scenarios, that I have my pessimistic scenario there, but there's another scenario which Ivar, I'd be very keen to get your sense of. All of the flow-through and hybrid flow-through projects at the moment are built in Iceland and Norway, and both of those countries have sea pen industries. And I do wonder, at some point, when you see that some of these companies now have figured out that they can do post-smolts and they can sell post-smolts and kind of optimize their profit models. But I actually wonder if some of these facilities might just go all post-smolt eventually and just figure out that they can use these pens to finish the salmon in the sea. So you're taking fish up to 2 or 3 kilos in weight on land, and then you're just putting them in the sea at the end, which is a very different way of going about this, but is possible, right?
Yeah.
Okay, keen to see what you think on that one.
Well, I think that is it is a very good, you could call it an escape route, because it would be ideal for that. I mean, a lot of post-smolts are somewhere between maybe 400, 600, 700 grams. In those systems, you could make them to 1 kilogram, and they would be ideal for that. I completely agree that could be an option. And I mean, where post-smolt hasn't been that successful is where they produce them to very large fish, but they don't smoltify them properly. So if you still smoltify them, and then carry on in these systems in salt water as if it was a cage, but just making it to 1 kilogram, for instance, or maybe even 1.5, whatever. I think that would work exceptionally well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Amanda, maybe we'll quit the presentation. We'll just chat. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I mean, I think as well, when we talk about ways in which, because at the end of the day, the end goal here is that the salmon industry has not managed to increase output over several years until this year, where we've had a big production boost. And one of the things I've been trying to figure out is you have a number of technologies right now that are advancing rapidly. So you have a lot more post-smolt in the system. And post-smolt, you know, when you look at the anecdotal evidence of each company, when they add post-smolt facilities, they're really doing a lot better with their production and mortality rates. But then at the same time, some of these companies are also using semi-closed containment technology. They're using submerged cage technology, which is improving performance in some of the trickiest kind of parts of the Norwegian salmon production regions, like the southern parts. And I'm wondering do you think that this year's increase in production is partly down to these technological improvements, or would you say it's more just just nature's being kind to the industry this year?
Well, I don't think nature has been kind. I think if we look at Norway, with an increase in post-smolt in sizes, numbers, etc., you do then give larger production potential in the sea, and that is probably what is happening.
Yeah, no, exactly. I find it hard to figure out because you have that trend, but you also have the very rapid evolution of the cage technology as well, and Norway's moving to submerged cages so quickly. Yeah, there's also a very positive impact from that, and these impacts are kind of mixed up. I sometimes like to look at the Faroes. The Faroes have, obviously companies like Bakkafrost have invested very heavily in post-smolts, and there is, and that industry still grows quite without, increasing the licenses, but just you can see that there's definitely something going on there. Whereas in Chile, where they haven't really invested in post-smolt, you don't see much increase in production, at least until this year. There's going to be a big bump this year.
Look at Finnmark in Norway, where the companies up there always needed the fish over 2 winters in the sea. With post-smolt, now they only need them 1 winter, and that is a huge difference, a huge improvement.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's actually when you see some of the M&A in the salmon industry, that's been the prime area or target for some of the largest salmon farming companies in the world to be up in those northern regions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, of course, we haven't spoken about, when we spoke about China, their plans to use shipping tankers to produce fish in. Even salmon too, seemingly, the plans they have and what they are building at the moment.
Yeah, it's super interesting, isn't it? And I haven't seen that many of the operating results, but there certainly seems to be a lot of investment in that type of technology as well. Do you think it can work?
Well, I mean, there would be challenges there, even from a host-friendly point of view. I think there could be challenges, but my worry would probably more be that we think the oceans are crystal clear or clean waters, but if you, and I know these figures from the GOES Foundation, if you sample a 1 liter bottle in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean from the surface, you have more than 1,000 soot particles. And soot particles is polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are very harmful, carcinogenic even. So if you can imagine in the Chinese Sea, which is where the shipping traffic is. I mean, the soot particles come from shipping, is even much more busy. And then you have these ships, which in fact are acting like filter feeders, whales taking all this in from the surface. I'm just wondering if there could be an issue there with safety. In fact, if you go below, I mean, very few pelagic fish are living in the surface. They are below this zone. And so fish would be safe enough, general fishing, but the actual surface is not that, there could be a potential problem there.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I definitely want to investigate that one further. Amanda, we're getting quite deep into conversation.
That's what I was about to say. I'm like, we could turn
questions.
I said we could turn this into like a whole series, but no, actually, I was about to say that right now that we're winding down on time. So I was going to say, final thoughts. Both of you, just what are you positive outlook for the RAS environment? Looking forward, negative.
Well, I am positive for the future because I know we have some concepts and systems which are performing as they should, and that's the most important thing. The difficult thing, unlike agriculture, in aquaculture, it's as if there's not the same exchange of knowledge, or not the same. Many people still have to invent the wheel, where it isn't necessary, and that's what's holding it back a little bit. They found out 100 years ago in agriculture how important it was to cooperate, and we're not doing that quite in aquaculture.
And Matt, your final thoughts?
That's an interesting thought as well. I've spoken a lot with Jens Thordarsen at Geosalmo. He came from the airline industry and often talks of the fact that he's not interested in trying to build airplanes as the COO of an airline company. He wants to run an airline, and that's and I think that's an interesting, a logical way of looking at it. I mean, I think that we're going to probably hit $2 billion in total deal flow to RAS systems this year, if you add up both the grow out projects and also the amount of dollars that go into the actual conventional salmon industry to grow post-smolt. But actually now the grow out part of it is now the lion's share of that money. And as we just saw, there's 100,000 tons of new capacity being built right now. These are projects that are not speculative anymore. They've got the capital to reach the finish line with their construction. And there are now several very big facilities that are really just firing up their systems. I think it's a crunch time for the industry, because if you do get major failures again, then it's definitely going to limit the amount of new projects. But I think with some of the performance that's being shown by these companies, and we just looked at Stolt, and we looked at and we were talking about the Clares project that Ivar mentioned, and also the Danish projects, we're starting to see new ventures get financed again, which is really interesting. I think it's a rotten year right now with the prices, and also the tariff situation that's sort of in a way is not limited, but it's you wonder what's going to happen to the future of US demand, seafood demand. But I think it's all there, and it's happening. And the remarkable thing is that there's just such a large amount of investment right now in a select number of projects, maybe, but it's really evolving. And I'm super curious. I think as well, one of the things I'll take from Ivar's comments as well is that trout's a really interesting part of this puzzle, because trout is a replacement to salmon in many cases. It's a super nice fish. In Japan and the Southeast Asian countries right now, salmon demand is exploding, and you can sell trout as salmon in those countries.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting topic, because that fish just performs better in those systems. And I wouldn't mind betting we'll see a few more trout projects come up.
Also, there's quite a big interest for trout now, also in places like Saudi Arabia, which I'm now just getting into. So
yeah, and it's the Middle East has always been there, isn't it? In terms of they were going to build all these projects, and they maybe the fact that they've been on the fence a little bit means that they've been able to observe 4 or 5 years of failures, and figuring out what works and what doesn't work.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you both. One final plug is just that the LBAR 2025 is part of the Land-based Aquaculture Intelligence Suite, the only offering that combines the LBAR annual report for 2025, the deep data insights and forecasts, the LBAR digital, which is a live searchable global project database with you have a 1-year access to that, and then the LBAM, the monthly market analysis and industry updates. This is like a living report, isn't it, Matt?
It's we're what we're doing, instead of doing the analysis once a year, looking at getting all the numbers and whacking out this giant report, we have decided to just do analysis throughout the year, and we're also updating the projects as we go along. But we still make the annual report, and it is what it is. We give it's like a state of the industry address. And we have all of the numbers, and we refresh the numbers, and we figure out we have all these new metrics now. We look at deal flow and production forecasts and CapEx averages, OpEx averages, and we're even starting to look at what mistakes these companies make and how that's evolved over time. So that's a new feature that we're working on right now. So lots of different types of data and alt data.
Love it. All right. Thanks again. And you can find more information for that in the show notes. So thanks, everyone.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ivar. It's great to have you on.
Thank you.